Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Juliet Mann. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Farmers' protests disrupt European cities as new GDP figures reveal gloomy economic news across the EU. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres is to meet major aid donors to try to defuse a diplomatic storm over its agency for Palestinians. This as hopes for a ceasefire in Gaza inch forward. Hamas says it's reviewing a plan following high-level talks in Paris. And China and the United States hold talks in Beijing over efforts to stem the flow of the highly addictive painkiller fentanyl. From Brussels to Bucharest, major European cities are bracing for the arrival of farmers aggrieved about soaring costs and what they call excessive red tape. The feeling of disquiet on the continent comes alongside the release of more grim economic news. While the Eurozone narrowly avoided recession, gross domestic product fell by 0.1% in the final quarter of last year. The entire euro area grew just 0.5% during 2023. Now, among the worst performance was Germany, once the economic powerhouse of Europe. GDP shrank by 0.3% in 2023, with falling investment in construction, machinery and equipment to blame for that. A recession could be on the cards in coming months. Many economists aren't expecting any growth for the start of this year. Almost as bleak news in France, the Eurozone's second largest economy. GDP grew by 0.9% throughout 2023, but that was hampered by slow growth in the final quarter of the year. Now, France narrowly avoided a technical recession, but many economists expect that stagnation to persist into 2024. Now, it's that grim economic picture providing the backdrop for dozens of protests gripping European cities. Farmers in tractors have been shutting down major roads in Paris, in Hamburg, Brussels, Berlin and Bucharest. They say European agricultural regulations are choking their livelihoods. Let's talk to our correspondent, Tony Waterman. She's in Paris for us. Tony, what's been the reaction in Europe to those economic figures?
Well, I don't think that there's been a lot of surprise with this gloomy economic data. When you look at the economic headwinds that not just France, but all of Europe is facing right now. We have these elevated interest rates that are trying to tackle high inflation. You have lackluster foreign demand from a lot of Europe's trading partners, and you have heightened geopolitical tensions, and all of that is really starting to drag down on household spending, which then, of course, ripples out into the broader economy. And economists are saying that it is going to take a massive spike in acceleration when it comes to growth in order for France to hit that 1.4% growth target that it needs to underpin its 2024 budget. And of course, that budget now coming under increased strain among these farmer protests that are happening across the country and have been going on now for about 2 weeks. They have given the government 140 demands. Topping their list is better pay. They want to roll back an environmental regulation, which they say is just too costly for them right now. And they want assurances on FTAs, on free trade agreements that they see as undermining their ability to compete in their home market. And this has really become a major test for France's newly appointed Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, who last week made some concessions to these farmers. He canceled a planned fuel hike, simplified some of the regulation, and he promised to crack down on distributors that are going around laws that are meant to protect farmers' salaries. More concessions are expected today, and in fact, Prime Minister Attal is going to be giving a speech starting any minute now, laying out his government's priorities for his time in office. But whatever he does end up saying today is likely to be overshadowed by this crisis.
Well, Tony, that's what's happening in France, but there are angry farmers heading for many other European cities too. I mean, is there anything to suggest that other lawmakers are listening to their concerns?
Well, you're right. These protests are taking place in a number of countries across the EU right now. All of them have varying degrees of complaints that they're issuing. But one thing that seems to be a common thread throughout all of them are these new environmental regulations as part of the Green Deal that are going to start taking effect. So one big one is the fact that 4% of farmland should be set aside. Also limitations on pesticides, and all of them are saying this is going to impact their ability to produce food at a time when the EU is also looking for greater food security. And another thing that they're concerned about is this FTA with South America's Mercosur trade bloc. This includes Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And actually, this is an agreement that has been in the works for decades now and was reached back in 2019. But the pact has yet to be ratified. And so these farmers are putting a lot of pressure on politicians to not ratify that trade deal. They say that it will allow for cheaper imports from South America, cheaper imports from farmers that they say do not follow the same type of stringent regulations required in the EU. So this is something that is going to be brought up on Thursday when EU leaders are meeting in Brussels. Macron has said that he is going to put pressure on Ursula von der Leyen to kind of rethink some of these requirements, these environmental requirements and these FTAs that are supposed to be coming into fruition at this point. But again, this is a common thing that is happening throughout Europe right now.
Tony Waterman in Paris, thank you very much for that update. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is set to meet major aid donors in an effort to restart funding for its Palestinian agency. More than 20 aid organisations have issued a joint statement calling on countries to resume donations to the UN's agency, which is the largest humanitarian operation inside Gaza. A string of countries cut support to the group in the wake of allegations that some staff were involved in the Hamas attacks in October.
We appeal to donors not to suspend their funding to UNRWA at this critical moment. Cutting off funding will only hurt the people of Gaza, who desperately need support. This discussion is vital, of course, and criminal activity can never go unpunished. But the discussion right now is much of a distraction from what's really going on every day, every hour, every minute in Gaza.
Israeli special forces, disguised as Palestinian women and doctors, have killed 3 people in a hospital in the West Bank city of Jenin. Surveillance footage appears to show undercover troops pacing through a hospital with assault weapons. Some appear to have fake beards. Others are dressed as Muslim women, and one is in a wheelchair. The Israeli military says 3 alleged terror operatives were killed during the raid. Our correspondent Noor Harazin is in Rafah. Noor, tell us more about the Israeli raid in Jenin, and has Hamas responded?
Well, yes, actually, Hamas had a statement hours following this Israeli raid, this Israeli assassination. They said in this statement that the Israeli crimes will not go unanswered. And this is a very strong statement from Hamas, and it reads that things will intensify, actually, not only in the West Bank, but also maybe here in Gaza. And this is not the first Israeli raid on the Palestinian refugee camp of Jenin. This camp, Jenin camp, have been subjected to weekly Israeli raids. However, this is the first time where an undercover troops go inside the hospital. According to leaders in Hamas, the 3 young men that were killed, one of them actually do belong to Hamas. He's a member in Hamas and in Al-Qassam Brigade, which is the militant wing of Hamas. The other young man is from the Jenin battalion, which is a very new resistance group. And the third one is also a resistance fighter, a militant fighter. This all came in the statements from Hamas. However, now Palestinians are waiting to see what will happen in the next few hours. This is something very sensitive to happen at this timing. This is something huge, actually, to happen in Jenin, especially that the police and the resistance fighters inside the refugee camp did not manage to control what was happening inside the hospital.
No, Hamas says it's reviewing a ceasefire plan. What do we know about that?
Well, yes, they said they are reviewing the newest plan brokered by Qatar, Egypt, the United States, and Ismail Haniyeh from his side, who is the head of Hamas political bureau, who is now in Qatar. He says that they will be reviewing this plan. However, what Palestinians, what Hamas actually want to implement a ceasefire, to implement a truce with Israel, is a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, from the Gaza Strip, and for Israel to completely stop its war on the Gaza Strip. This is not likely to happen. However, this is what Hamas are asking for, and this is actually what is not happening here on the ground. Even though the Israeli military, the Israeli troops withdrew actually from large areas in Gaza, in northern Gaza, and in central Gaza City, in middle Gaza City over the past weeks. However, in the past 48 hours, there were new Israeli invasion, a new Israeli land incursion in those areas. So it is actually a little bit confusing. What is happening here on the ground does not match what the truce and the negotiations are talking about. However, people are hopeful. Ismail Haniyeh also said that they got an invitation to go to Egypt to discuss the implementing of this truce.
Noor Harrison in Rafah, thank you very much. Well, let's get the view from Israel now. Our correspondent Sarah Coates is in Tel Aviv. Sarah, what more is Israel saying about, let's talk about that raid first, about the raid in Jenin.
Well, look, Israel is claiming that these 3 young Palestinian men were actually terror operatives. They say that they were claiming, or planning, I should say, an attack similar to October 7 in the very near future, adding that one of these men actually had a gun on him in hospital. Now, according to a joint statement issued by the IDF, the Shin Bet and the Israeli police, the 27-year-old leader of the cell had been in contact with Hamas operatives abroad, adding that he was previously injured while he was preparing a car bomb, and armed other operatives for shooting attacks. They went on saying that he was behind this potential October 7 inspired terror attack that they say was imminent. Now, with regards to these other 2 men, they were brothers, according to the military. One had been involved in shooting attacks on Israeli troops inside the West Bank, while the other belonged to Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But look, there is a lot of concern that this could potentially see this conflict widen even further into the West Bank, which of course is an area that the United States has been highly concerned about, and an area it's been telling Israel to try and keep a lid on.
And Sarah, let's talk about those mediation talks. What's the latest on those talks to try and secure the release of the hostages?
Well, look, it certainly seems as though there potentially was some movement on these talks, but the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he is appearing to pour cold water on that. He's just visited a school in the West Bank at a settlement there, saying that with regards to a potential hostage deal, the IDF will not leave Gaza. Israel will continue to achieve its goals in the Strip, and that is defeating Hamas, and that there is no way that Israel will release thousands of Palestinian prisoners, which is a proposal of this deal. So look, there is a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister, of course, to get these people out. And also, it is important to say, a lot of pressure building on Qatar with the families of these captives, telling Doha it needs to do more to pressure Hamas.
Qatar need to choose if they are with Western civilization, like a Western beacon in the Middle East, or they are hosting Hamas. And if Qatar wanted, the hostages will be back tomorrow. It's in their hand. They have the power to do it. So part of the delegation is to put international pressure on Qatar to release them.
And look, it's also causing friction here in Israel, especially among the right wing. The far-right controversial National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, he is now threatening to bring down the government if a, quote, reckless deal is reached.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you very much. You're watching CGTN, still ahead. 2 years of political deadlock in Northern Ireland. Is that all about to change?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
The 27th of January marks the 60th anniversary of China and France beginning their diplomatic relationship and starting a historic new chapter. We'll be covering the partnership in detail with week-long special coverage and meeting the bridge builders who have dedicated their lives to strengthening ties between the two countries. China-France 60 years, beginning Saturday, the 27th of January, on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Farmer protests disrupt European cities as new GDP figures reveal gloomy economic news across the EU. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres is to meet major aid donors to try to diffuse a diplomatic storm over its agency for Palestinians. And hopes for a ceasefire in Gaza inch forward. Hamas says it's reviewing a plan following high-level talks in Paris. Officials from China and the United States are meeting in Beijing to address the crackdown on fentanyl exports. It's the first meeting of the working group looking to stop the export of fentanyl chemicals since the two countries restarted cooperation on counter-narcotics. CGTN's correspondent Zhou Xiaojin reports.
At the direction of Chinese and U.S. presidents, the two sides have agreed to launch the anti-narcotics working group to resume and navigate their joint fight against opiates, particularly the fentanyl. It begins with their first formal talks on Tuesday in Beijing's Diaoyutai State Guest House. High-level officials from Chinese Ministry of Public Security and U.S. Department of Homeland Security, as well as U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, discussed how to do more to cooperate on tackling fentanyl manufacturing and cutting financing for the trade. The Minister of Chinese Public Security, Wang Xiaohong, said the working group represented an important common understanding reached by the two presidents last November when the counter-narcotics cooperation was among the topics Chinese President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden agreed on during their summit in San Francisco. To deliver on that, the U.S. side has lifted immediately sanctions on relevant Chinese law enforcement institute. And China also issued a public notice warning export orders of 51 precursor chemicals made for the United States and Mexico may face what it called long-arm jurisdiction and even sting operation. One believed that the working level talks now were in-depth and pragmatic, hoping future meetings would see two sides accommodating each other's concerns to enhance and expand cooperation to provide more positive energy for stable, sound, and sustainable China-U.S. relations. And the U.S. officials in the past have accused China of being the primary source of the precursor chemicals. Chinese Foreign Ministry said that China, quote, firmly opposes smears and unilateral sanctions on the country under the pretext of the fight against the drugs. China also referred to the U.S. as a black hole in some, the source of a problem for global drug control. With 5% of the world's population, about 80% of the global opioid have been consumed in the United States. Beijing says that the progress now in resuming the cooperation has not come easy and needs to be doubly cherished by both sides, hoping the U.S. will work with China in the same direction and practically cooperate based on mutual respect, equality, and mutual benefit, and that would contribute to the improvement in China-U.S. relations.
Northern Ireland has had no government for 2 years. Now the Unionist Party, the DUP, has agreed to return to the power-sharing administration in return for the UK government changing trading arrangements. The DUP withdrew from the power-sharing agreement with Republican rivals Sinn Féin. The party had been angered by post-Brexit trade arrangement that created barriers between mainland Britain and Northern Ireland. Our correspondent, Yellow Up David, has been following the story. Thank goodness, because it's complicated. So tell us, first of all, let's talk about the announcement.
It is complicated because it's long-standing. But this announcement by the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party is significant because within the party, which was pro-Brexit but opposed to staying within a kind of a loose European Union trade arrangements because, of course, it shares the island of Ireland with the Republic to the south, but the north is part of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So that's the difficulty. And they've agreed now that they, as a party, 130 of them, 5-hour-long party, a 5-hour meeting, that they've agreed that they can move ahead, provided there's new legislation by the UK government. So it is significant to try and stop this stalemate with no government in the province of Northern Ireland, and this is what Jeffrey Donaldson had to say at something like 1 a.m. After this meeting.
This package, I believe, safeguards Northern Ireland's place in the Union and will restore our place within the UK internal market. It will remove checks for goods moving within the UK and remaining in Northern Ireland, and will end Northern Ireland automatically following future EU laws.
Now, if you think that it's about economy, you'd be wrong. It's about politics, and it invariably is. Chris Heaton-Harris is the Northern Irish Secretary in the British government. He now, if this is to work, he has to try and look at the details. He will address Parliament in London, and there could be movement quite quickly, provided that the detail stands to scrutiny and it's accepted by politicians on both sides, and we could see some changes in terms of the Northern Irish, the Stormont building, and people actually meeting in that building. Now, there are lots of details to go through, and not least that the largest party in Northern Ireland now is Sinn Féin, the Nationalist Party, and the president of Sinn Féin, Mary Lou McDonald, said that we're on the cusp of restoration of government in Northern Ireland. That's a very good thing. It's a long time coming, but we're conscious there's a huge amount of work to be done, not least because it was the DUP that actually pulled the plug on local government in Northern Ireland in 2022.
But you know what I can't believe? Tomorrow will be 4 years since the UK officially left the European Union. I know the conversation went a lot longer, but officially left.
Yes.
Brexit officially happened 4 years ago. So in that context, why is this significant? Why is it important?
It's significant for the 1.9 million people who live in Northern Ireland. They are about possibly to have a government running their own affairs. There will be money and finance coming from the UK government to improve conditions, living conditions for people who live and work in Northern Ireland. And while the various politicians have been at each other's throats over a political ideology, the people of Northern Ireland, of course, like elsewhere, have had to deal with what's happened with Brexit and what's happened with all these trade agreements. And the trade agreement was, in terms of goods coming in from England or Scotland or Wales into Northern Ireland, whether they, because Northern Ireland is attached by land to the Republic of Ireland and so the European Union, that was the problem. Now they're going to try and fudge around the rules again to have a green lane, a red lane in terms of costs on top of what is imported and exported. That's the detail we'll be hearing about tomorrow.
Look forward to it. You're up, David. Thank you very much. China and France are celebrating 60 years of diplomatic relations, and we've been taking a closer look at that cooperation, including in the nuclear industry, where collaboration dates back to the 1970s. CGTN's correspondent Chao Chungfeng reports.
This is Daya Bay Nuclear Power Plant, and it marked the beginning of nuclear power cooperation between China and France. Today, a quarter of electricity used by Hong Kong is generated by this plant, which has been running safely for 3 decades.
In 1978, former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping proposed that we should import 2 nuclear power units from France. Eventually, it was decided they would be established in the location we're in now, which is Daya Bay in Shenzhen, Guangdong Province.
The construction of the nuclear power station started in 1987 and was completed after 7 years in 1994. French companies helped train Chinese engineers to operate the nuclear power plant, and much of the main technologies were also imported from France.
This is the model of our Daya Bay nuclear power station's reactor. The entire reactor was imported from France. It's the core component of a nuclear power plant. At that time, it was the world's highest safety-rated nuclear reactor. I have full confidence that it can continue to operate for another 30 years or even longer.
China and France have been cooperating with each other on nuclear power for over 4 decades, and China's technologies used to build and operate nuclear power plant have developed tremendously since then. Today, instead of China mostly learning from France, the 2 countries can learn from each other.
We continue benchmarking with French nuclear power plants. We have consistently found there are many aspects in which we still need to learn from them. Of course, peers in France would also come to us for benchmarking. Decades ago, we were students, and peers from France were teachers. Now we are friends.
Since Daya Bay, China and France have also collaborated on several other nuclear power projects, such as Taishan Nuclear Power Plant in Guangdong, which is developed and operated together by the 2 countries. In 2023, the 2 countries also signed new cooperation agreements in nuclear energy during French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Beijing, paving the way for further collaboration. Cao Chufeng, CGTN, Daya Bay Nuclear Station.
The headlines again. Farmer protests disrupt European cities as new GDP figures reveal gloomy economic news across the EU. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres is to meet major aid donors to try to defuse a diplomatic storm over its agency for Palestinians. And hopes for a ceasefire in Gaza inch forward. Hamas says it's reviewing a plan following high-level talks in Paris. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, though, it's World Insight. For now, from all the team here in London, goodbye.